You don't own a road, you old fool. Nobody owns a road. Move your trucks or we tow them, and the new lot opens Monday, whether you like it or not. That was Brenda Voss, president of the Stonewater Ridge Homeowners Association for 6 years running, standing at the foot of my driveway in a hot pink blazer and white sneakers, reading off a clipboard while 2 of her contractors idled a roller behind her. The driveway she was talking about was the spur of pavement that ran up from the county line to my shop and house on Mill Hollow Road. 11 acres of pine and gravel and old quarry ground my wife and I bought in 1989. Brenda had decided over the winter that my driveway and the lane it fed off of were going to become overflow parking for the clubhouse her husband was building on the far side of the ridge. She had paint crews. She had a survey she'd ordered herself. She had a letter from the association's lawyer. What she did not have, and never once thought to check, was the recorded instrument that said who held the surfacing and pavement rights on every foot of asphalt from the county road to my gate. I held them. I had held them for 36 years. So what would you have done, standing in your own driveway, watching a woman in white sneakers tell you that you don't own the ground you poured yourself? My name is Walt Brenner. I'm 63 years old. For 31 years, I was a road and surface engineer for the State Highway District, the man who signed off on the mix design and the lift thickness and the compaction tests on every county and farm-to-market road in 3 counties. I knew asphalt the way a baker knows bread. I could tell you the temperature a mix had been laid at by the way it cracked. And I could read the history of a road and the pattern of its failures the way a doctor reads an X-ray. I retired in 2021, after the district gave me a plaque and a folding knife with my name on it, and a handshake from a director who couldn't remember my first name. I went home that afternoon and walked my own lane and thought, well, here is the one road in the world that's truly mine. My wife Carol and I bought the Mill Hollow place the year we married, back when the lane up to it was nothing but a washboard track that turned to soup every spring. The first March we lived there, Carol's little hatchback sank to the rocker panels twice in 1 week. And the second time, she walked the last quarter mile in the rain and came in laughing with mud to her knees and said, "Walt, you fix roads for a living. Fix this one." So I did. Not the county, not a developer. Me, with borrowed equipment from the district yard on a weekend, and a crew of friends I paid in barbecue and beer, and a permit I pulled, and an easement I recorded at the county clerk's office with my own hand on a Friday afternoon while the clerk's radio played a ball game in the back. Carol passed 4 years ago, in the spring, in the same season she'd walked up that muddy lane, laughing. It was fast, which the doctors called a mercy and I called a robbery. I keep her reading glasses on the windowsill over the kitchen sink where she left them, folded, with one arm bent the way she always left them, and I have never moved them, and I do not intend to. Our daughter Nina lives with me now, 17, a junior at the county high school, with her mother's dark hair and her mother's habit of going quiet right before she says the truest thing in the room. She is the reason I keep the gate locked and the cameras running. Everything I built on that ridge, I built for the 2 of them. And the road was the first thing I built. And I was not going to let a woman with a clipboard turn it into a parking lot. I want to tell you up front, the way I'd tell a neighbor across a fence, that I am not a man who likes trouble. I tried the polite way first. I tried it for almost 3 years. The trouble found me anyway. And when it did, I did what I have always done with trouble. I wrote it down. I kept a manila folder, then a binder, then 3 binders, and every notice and every photograph and every recording went into them in order, dated and labeled, the way I used to file an after-action report when a culvert failed or a shoulder slid. I did not yell. I did not threaten. I filed. And the whole time, The thing Brenda never bothered to verify sat in a drawer in my office, recorded and stamped and older than her marriage, waiting. Let me take you back to the beginning of it. Stonewater Ridge wasn't there when Carol and I moved in. For the first 15 years, our nearest neighbor was a cattleman named Earl, who ran black baldies on the slope below us and waved every morning with 2 fingers off the wheel of his truck. Earl and I had an arrangement that never once needed paper. If his cattle got through a fence onto my ground, he came and got them and mended the wire. And if my culvert backed up and flooded his low pasture, I came and cleared it. And we drank coffee on each other's tailgates twice a year and called it a homeowners association. That was the kind of country it was. A man's word ran the length of his handshake and not 1 inch past it. And nobody needed a clipboard to know where his line was. The development came in around 2006, when a builder bought Earl's place after Earl's heart gave out, and the 2 parcels beyond it, and platted out 140 lots with a gatehouse and a man-made pond they called a lake. The HOA formed the same year. For a long time, it had nothing to do with me. My 11 acres sat outside the plat. My lane came off the county road a quarter mile before the development's entrance, ran up through my own pines, and dead-ended at my shop. There was no reason on earth for the association to think it had any say over my pavement. The first president was a retired airline pilot who walked over once, introduced himself, admired my shop, and never bothered me again. That was how it should have gone forever. Then Brenda Voss got elected president in 2019, and her husband Dell bought the last undeveloped parcel on the ridge, and everything changed. I met Brenda for the first time in the fall of 2022. It was a Tuesday morning, a little after 9, and I was running a patch on the apron at the bottom of my drive, where a freeze had spider-cracked the surface. I had the mix in the back of the truck and a rake in my hand when a white luxury SUV with a vanity plate that read RIDGE1 pulled onto my apron and stopped 6 feet from my legs. Brenda got out in a linen blazer, the color of a traffic cone, holding a clipboard against her chest like a breastplate. "You can't be doing road work without association approval," she said. "This whole corridor is functionally part of our community now. Aesthetic standards apply." I leaned on the rake and looked at her. I told her plainly that the corridor was my driveway, that it sat outside her plat, and that I had paved it myself before her HOA existed. I told her she was welcome to check the county records. She smiled the way people smile when they have already decided you are beneath them. "We'll see about that," she said. And she got back in the SUV and backed off my apron and drove up the ridge. That was incident 1. I went inside, I labeled a folder Mill Hollow, and I wrote down the date, the time, the plate, and what was said. I did not know yet that I would need 100 more entries. The engineer in me has never trusted a single data point, though, so I started the file anyway. What she did not know was this. When I paved that lane in 1989, the county had no money and no interest in maintaining a private spur for one household. So I did what an engineer does. I pulled a private road construction permit. I built the road to county spec on my own dime. And in exchange, the county recorded an instrument granting me and my heirs and assigns the exclusive surfacing and pavement rights to the entire roadway from the county line to my property line. Not just an access easement. The pavement itself. The right to surface it, to maintain it, to permit or deny any alteration of the wearing course. 4,100 feet of asphalt that belonged to me down to the base layer, recorded in the county deed records in book and page, signed by the county engineer of the day. A man named Holloway, who I'd worked under as a young man and who shook my hand when he stamped it. I had a copy. The county had the original. Brenda had a survey she'd paid for that showed a road and assumed, because it looked like a road, that it belonged to everyone. Now you know the things she didn't. Stay with me, because the way she found out is the whole story. The second incident came 11 days later. A man in a polo shirt and a lanyard with a laminated badge showed up at my gate on a Thursday afternoon and announced he was there for a compliance inspection. I asked to see his credentials. The badge said Stonewater Ridge Code Enforcement, which is a thing that does not exist, because an HOA is not a government and cannot enforce code. I told him that. He got flustered, took photographs of my shop and my equipment over the gate, and left. I had the whole thing on camera. I saved it to the office drive, and to a second drive I keep in the gun safe, and I wrote it down. Incident 2. The fines started in the new year. They came on association letterhead, certified mail, and they were beautiful pieces of theater. The first one came on a Tuesday in January, and I remember because I'd been splitting wood and came in cold to find Nina holding the envelope at the kitchen table, turning it over, not opening it. I opened it standing at the counter. $200 for an unapproved structure, which was my shop, which I'd built with my own hands and a real county building permit in 2005, 17 years before the HOA decided it had an opinion. The next week, $500 for commercial activity in a residential corridor, which was me running a patch truck I'd owned since before Brenda ever moved to the state. The week after that, $300 for unauthorized surface modification, which was a fancy way of saying I had filled a pothole in my own driveway. Each notice was signed by Brenda Voss, president, in a looping signature with a little flourish under it, the signature of a woman who enjoyed signing things. By March, the fines totaled $4,100. I paid none of them. I did not call her, and I did not write an angry letter, and I did not drive up the ridge and throw the notices in her yard. Though I will tell you the thought crossed my mind on the bad nights. What I did was photograph each notice front and back, log the certified mail tracking number, note the date it arrived, and slide it into the binder in a labeled sleeve. $4,100 in fines for work I was legally entitled to do on pavement I legally owned. I want you to hold that number. It comes back. Nina was the one who told me to start recording the gate full time. She was 15 then, and she'd seen the code enforcement man's truck on the camera app on her phone while she was supposed to be studying. And she came into the kitchen white-faced and set her phone down on the table screen up and said, "Dad, there was a man taking pictures of the house, and he was looking at my window." That last part went into me like cold water. I put up 2 more cameras that weekend, one on the gate and one on the apron, both saving to the office drive and to a cloud account in my name. And I walked Nina through the app so she could see every camera from her phone anytime she wanted. I told her that nobody was going to come past the gate. I told her that if she was ever home alone and a vehicle she didn't recognize came up the lane, she was to go inside, lock the door, call me, and stay on the line until I got there or she heard my truck. She nodded the way kids do when they're being brave for you. Then she went back to her homework. And I sat in the dark of the shop a long time afterward with my jaw set and my hands flat on the cold steel of the bench, thinking about Carol, who would have known exactly what to say to take the fear out of our girl's face, and who was not there to say it. And so the job was mine, and I had better do it right. The fines were incident 3 through 9. I'm counting them as one staircase step, because they all said the same thing in the same voice. The voice was Brenda's, and the song never changed. In April of 2023, I learned what the fines were really about. I learned it from a man named Tom Reyes, who ran the gravel pit 2 ridges over and who I'd known for 20 years, since back when I used to buy aggregate off him for the district. Tom called me on a Saturday morning, and I could tell from the first word that he had something he didn't like carrying. He asked if I was sitting down. I told him I was standing in my shop, and that was as good as I got. He asked if I'd heard what Del Voss was planning. I hadn't. Tom told me that Del had come to the pit asking for crushed base and a haul rate, a lot of it, and that in the course of dickering, Del had let slip what it was for. Del had filed for a permit to build a 40,000 square foot event center on the parcel behind the ridge, a wedding and conference operation with a banquet hall and an overflow lot for 300 cars. And the only legal access to that back parcel that didn't require cutting a $500,000 new road across a wetland ran straight down my lane. Del needed my pavement. He needed to move 10,000 cars a year over it. And Brenda, president of the association that was fining me into the ground, was his wife. Tom went quiet on the line, and then he said the part he'd really called to say. He said, "Walt, the way I figure it, those fines aren't about your shop. They're trying to make your road look like it belongs to everybody, so that when the time comes, Del can run his traffic down it and tell a judge it was always a community road." I sat down on the shop stool after all. I thanked Tom. I sat with it on the porch for a while, watching the light come up over the pines, and the real shape of the thing came clear, the way a road's failure pattern comes clear once you know what caused it. This was never about aesthetics. It was never about my shop or my patch truck or a pothole. It was about a man who wanted to move 10,000 cars a year over 4,100 feet of asphalt he did not own, and a wife with a clipboard who'd been sent to soften the ground ahead of him. I called Tom back the next morning and asked him if he'd put in writing what he'd told me, just the facts, what Del said and when, and he said he would. And 3 days later, a one-page signed statement came in the mail, and it went into the binder. By then I had 2 binders. I labeled the second one Stonewater, and I knew, the way you know a grade is going to slide before it slides, that it was going to get worse before it got better. The escalation widened that summer. Brenda stopped coming to my gate and started coming to my customers. I still did the occasional patch job for old clients, county work mostly, small parking lots and church drives, the kind of jobs a retired man takes to keep his hand in and his back from seizing up entirely. Brenda found out who they were. I don't know how. Maybe the survey company, maybe Del. Maybe she just called around the way people like her do. What I do know is what she said, because the people she said it to told me. She told a church secretary in town that I was operating without a license and under investigation by the county for fraud. She told a man who'd hired me to seal his lot that there was a lien on my equipment and that anything I touched could be seized. Both were lies, top to bottom, top to toe. There was no investigation. There was no lien. There was no license problem. Because the work I did didn't require the license she was talking about and never had. A lie travels in work boots while the truth is still lacing up, though. And both men canceled. The church secretary was a woman named Ruth, somewhere past 70, who'd hired me to patch the lot at Mill Creek Baptist for 15 years running. Ruth called me herself the evening after she canceled, and her voice was shaking. She said, "Walt, I have to ask you something, and I need you to tell me straight." She told me what Brenda had said, word for word, the fraud, the investigation, all of it. I told her none of it was true and that I could prove every word of that with paper. There was a long quiet on the line. Then Ruth said she was ashamed she'd believed it for even an afternoon, and she asked what she could do. I asked her if she'd be willing to write down what Brenda had said and sign it. She said she'd do better than that. She'd have it notarized, and she did, the next morning before church. That statement went into the binder. By my count, we were somewhere around incident 14, and I had stopped being able to tell the staircase steps apart by anything but their dates. I went to the sheriff's office in July. I brought both binders in a canvas tote and set them on the desk of a deputy named Carl Briggs. A steady young man, maybe 35, with a flat-top haircut and a habit of writing everything in a pocket notebook in small square print. I'd met him once before, at a fundraiser pancake breakfast, and he'd remembered my name, which told me something about him. He poured me a cup of bad coffee in a paper cone and told me to start at the beginning. I did. He read for a long time, turning pages, stopping now and then to write something in the notebook, and he did not interrupt me once. When he closed the second binder, he set both hands flat on the cover and told me the thing that every honest officer eventually tells a man in my position. "Walt, here's where we are," he said. "A complaint gets filed. We have to look at it. Doesn't matter if it's garbage. Doesn't matter if I can see it's garbage. That's the law, and the law's the same for her as it is for you. Which cuts both ways. I can't arrest a woman for being wrong about a property line. I can't arrest her for being rude in your driveway. What you've got here, though, is a pattern. And patterns are how these things get built. You keep filing. You date everything. You photograph everything. You get to where there is no daylight between her story and the record. And then one of two things happens. Either she stops, or she does something she can't take back." I asked him what the number was, what it would take. He flipped back through his notebook and said that when you have a dozen documented incidents that flat contradict a person's own written and sworn statements, you stop having a dispute and you start having a case. I told him I already had more than a dozen. He went back through the binder and counted, out loud, under his breath. And when he got past 20, he stopped and looked up and wrote that number down too. Then he tore a page from the back of the notebook, wrote his cell number on it, and slid it across the desk. "When the day comes that she does the things she can't take back," he said, "you call me first, not after. First, and you don't touch her, you don't block her, you don't say a word more than good morning. You let me and that paper do the work. You hear me?" I told him I heard him. He walked me out to my truck and shook my hand and said, calm as a Sunday, that he believed me, that I should be patient, and that patience was the only weapon a documented man ever needed. I drove home thinking about that. Patience as a weapon. It's the only kind I've ever been any good with, and it's the only kind that doesn't go off in your own hand. The thing about a counted staircase is that you can feel it under your feet, even when you can't see the top. That fall, the fines kept coming, certified mail every few weeks, and I kept not paying them, and the total climbed past $9,000. Brenda filed a lawsuit against me in November, a civil action to declare my lane a common area corridor, and to enjoin me from, the language read, interfering with community access. She had a lawyer named Pruitt, who sent thick letters on heavy paper, the kind designed to feel expensive in your hand and frighten you before you've read a word. I read every word. Then I answered every one of them myself, at the kitchen table, in plain language, no lawyer, because the engineer in me has never been afraid of a document. In my first response, I did one thing that mattered. I attached a clean copy of the recorded instrument, the surfacing rights, book, and page. And I wrote a single line directing Pruitt to verify it at the county clerk's office. Pruitt never mentioned the instrument again. Not in any letter that followed, not in any filing. He went quiet around it the way a man steps around a hole he's just noticed in the floor. And that silence told me everything. He had read it. He understood exactly what it meant. And he was hoping, the way a lawyer hopes, that I didn't, or that I'd lose my nerve before a judge ever had to look at it. I want to be clear about something, because it's the heart of how I was raised and how Carol and I ran our lives. I never sued anybody. I never sent a threatening letter. I never so much as raised my voice at Brenda Voss across that gate. Every move I made was a piece of paper filed where it belonged, dated, copied, and put away. The lawsuit she brought was the rope she was measuring for her own use, and I let her measure it, and I kept my hands in my pockets while she did. Winter came. The development emptied out the way those places do. Half the houses owned by people who only show up in summer to look at the pond they call a lake. Brenda got quiet through the holidays. Nina turned 16 and got her license and started driving herself to school, down our lane, onto the county road. And I will tell you that watching your kid drive away alone for the first time, when there's a woman on the next ridge who's already shown she'll lie to strangers about you, that puts a particular kind of cold in your chest that no coat fixes. I added a camera at the county road end of the lane, aimed down at the apron where the school bus used to turn around. I told myself I was being thorough. I was being a father. The spring of 2024 is when she crossed the line. It was a Monday, early, maybe 7 in the morning. I was in the shop when Nina's camera alert went off on my phone. I looked, and there were 3 trucks at the bottom of the lane, a paving crew, and a flatbed with a roller, and men unloading cones. And there was Brenda, in the hot pink blazer, directing them onto my apron. They were going to repave my driveway. Not maintain it. Repave it, widen the entry, stripe it into parking stalls, and post it as community overflow. And once it was striped and posted and used, she would argue in court that the corridor had become common area by function and that I had let it happen. I called Carl Briggs first, the way he'd told me to. Then I drove down to the gate. This is where I have to slow down, because this is the part that matters, and it did not go the way a movie would have it go. I did not block the trucks with my body. I did not shout. I walked up to the edge of my own apron, where Brenda was standing with her clipboard and her sneakers and a travel mug, and I said good morning, and "This corridor is being brought up to community standard," she said loud, for the benefit of the crew. "You've had 2 years of notice. You don't own a road, Mr. Brenner. Nobody owns a road. These men are going to do their work, and you're going to stand aside, and the new lot opens for the clubhouse Monday. Functionally, this has been part of our jurisdiction for years." That was the 3rd time I'd heard her say a version of that word, functionally, and the 2nd time she'd told me nobody owns a road, and both times I'd let it stand. I let it stand this time too. I asked her, level, whether she was certain she wanted these men to break ground on this pavement this morning. She told me to move. I asked the crew foreman one question. I asked him if he'd pulled a permit to mill and overlay a county-recorded roadway. He looked at Brenda. Brenda told him the association had authorized the work. I told him, quietly, that an association can't authorize work on pavement it doesn't hold the rights to, and that if he put a milling head into that surface, he'd be doing it against a recorded instrument, and that the man who held that instrument was standing in front of him. The foreman, to his credit, killed the roller. Carl Briggs arrived 11 minutes later. I know because the camera stamped it. Now here is the reveal, and I'm going to give it to you the way it happened, plain, because it didn't need dressing up. Carl got out of his cruiser. Brenda marched straight at him and started talking before he'd shut the door about trespass and obstruction and her crew's right to work. Carl let her talk. He has a way of letting people talk until they've spent themselves. When she ran down, he turned to me and asked if I had what we discussed. I went to my truck, and I came back with a single document in a clear plastic sleeve, and I handed it to him, not to her, to him. It was the recorded instrument from 1989, the surfacing and pavement rights to the whole lane, county line to property line, exclusive, signed by County Engineer Holloway, stamped by the clerk, recorded in the county deed records with a book and page number that Carl could call in and confirm in 2 minutes. Which he did, standing right there on his radio. The dispatcher read the record back to him. It matched, every word. Carl read it twice. Then he handed it back to me, and he turned to Brenda, and he said, "Mom, this pavement is recorded to Mr. Brenner. Surfacing rights, the whole length. Your crew puts a tool into it. That's criminal mischief to a recorded easement, and I'll have to act on it. You need to load up and leave his property." Brenda's face did a thing I'd been waiting 3 years to see. The certainty went out of it. She said the survey, she said the association, she said Dell's name before she could stop herself. And that was the first time I heard her admit out loud that this had ever been about Dell. Carl just waited. The foreman was already loading cones. I had paid 0 of the $11,400 in fines she'd levied. The instrument that ended it had been recorded 35 years before she ever sent the first one. 11,400 against 0, and a piece of paper older than her marriage. That was the gap. That was the whole gap, standing there on the apron in the morning light, and everybody on that pavement could feel it. Nobody said anything for a moment. The roller ticked as it cooled. A jay called somewhere, up in my pines. Brenda stood on the pavement she'd been so sure was hers, and she understood, finally, that she was standing on mine. The consequence was not something I had to reach for. It fell on its own, the way water finds the low ground. Del Voss had filed his event center permit on the assumption that he had access down my lane. He didn't. When the surfacing rights surfaced, so to speak, his whole project lost its legal access overnight. The county planning office, which had been moving the permit along on the strength of a site plan that showed a fat black access line running right down the middle of my pavement, sent him a letter requiring proof of legal access to the back parcel. He didn't have it. He couldn't get it, because the only person on earth who could grant traffic rights over that pavement was me, and I wasn't selling. And he knew better by then, and then to send his wife to ask. The permit application died on the planner's desk. Without legal access, the back parcel was worth a fraction of what Dell had paid for it. Land you can't get to is just a view. The bank that had floated him the construction loan, a loan secured against a project that no longer had a way in, called the note that summer. By August, there was a for sale sign staked at the front of the back parcel, leaning a little in the gravel. And the event center was a hole in the ground, with footings poured and rebar standing up out of them, and rusting orange in the rain, collecting leaves. I drove past it once on the county road and did not slow down. The association didn't fare much better. When the lawsuit finally went to a hearing the following fall, the recorded instrument was the only document the judge needed. Pruitt stood up and made the argument he'd been forced to make, that the road had become common area by long community use. And the judge asked him a single question, which was whether his client held any recorded interest in the surfacing of that roadway. Pruitt said no. The judge dismissed Brenda's action with prejudice, which means she can never bring it again. And he noted for the record, in a dry voice that carried all the way to the back bench where I was sitting, that the association had levied over $11,000 in fines on a parcel over which it held no jurisdiction whatsoever. 3 of the homeowners who'd been quietly grumbling about Brenda for years were sitting in that courtroom, and they used that hearing as the moment to organize. There was a recall petition by Thanksgiving and a recall vote that winter. Brenda Voss lost the presidency she'd held for 6 years by a margin of better than 2-1. The man who beat her, a retired schoolteacher named Hollis, ran on a single promise, which was that the association would stay inside its own plat and mind its own fences. He came down my lane the week after he won, on foot, and shook my hand at the gate, and apologized for something that was never his to apologize for. And I appreciated it anyway. There was a defector, too, the way there often is when a thing finally turns. A woman named Patty, who'd served on Brenda's board, came to me after the hearing in the courthouse parking lot, with her car keys already in her hand. She told me she'd voted against the fines every single time and been outvoted, and that she had the meeting minutes to prove it, and that she was sorry it had gone on as long as it had. I believed her. She didn't owe me anything, and I told her so. But she gave me the minutes anyway, a thick, stapled stack, and they went into the binder as the last entry. A quiet handoff between two tired people in a near-empty lot at the end of a long thing. I never collected $1 from Brenda Voss. I didn't sue her. The fines simply evaporated when the court said they were void, and that was enough. I didn't want her money. I wanted my pavement left alone, and now it was. Late that fall, on a Sunday, Nina and I walked the lane down to the county road the way Carol and I used to walk it. Nina was 17 by then, taller than her mother had been, with Carol's way of going quiet when she was thinking. She'd watched the whole thing from the start, the cameras, the binders, the morning the trucks came. At the bottom of the lane, she stopped and looked back up at the pavement running clean and gray through the pines to our gate. And she said, "Dad, you really did own the whole road." I told her I did. She asked me how I knew to keep the paper all those years. I told her that her mother had taught me that the careful thing and the kind thing are usually the same thing, and that you keep your records not to win fights, but so you never have to have them. Nina thought about that. Then she said the thing that put the whole 3 years to rest for me. She said, "Mom would have liked watching that lady's face." And I laughed, for what felt like the first time in a long while, because Carol surely would have. We walked back up to the house in the last of the light. And I checked the gate, and I locked it, the way I do every night. And through the kitchen window, I could see Carol's reading glasses on the sill where she left them. Let me step out of the story now and tell you plainly what I'd tell you across a fence. Because there's a lesson here, and it's worth more than the story. If you own property, find out exactly what you own, down to the layer. Knowing where your boundary lines run is the easy part, and most folks have that much. Fewer know whether they hold the easements, the surfacing rights, the water rights, the access rights that lie on top of and underneath that ground. Go to your county clerk's office. Pull your deed. Pull every recorded instrument tied to your parcel and read them, the boring language and all. And if you don't understand a clause, pay an hour of a real attorney's time to explain it. The day you need that paper, you will not have time to go find it. And keep records. I mean it the way an engineer means it. When somebody with a clipboard tells you that you don't own what you own, don't argue with them in the driveway. Write down the date, the time, what was said, who said it. Photograph everything. Save it twice, in 2 places. A pattern on paper beats a loud voice every time, and it beats it in the only room that matters, which is a courtroom with a judge who can read. The people in uniform are not your enemy. The deputy who came to my gate had to act on every garbage complaint Brenda filed, because that's his job. And the day I handed him a recorded instrument, he confirmed it in 2 minutes and stood with the record. He was never against me. He was waiting for the facts, the same as I was. If this happened to you, or you're watching it happen to somebody right now, tell me about it down in the comments. I read them. If stories about ordinary people holding their ground against people who never bothered to check the records are the kind of thing you want more of, subscribe, and I'll keep telling them. Next time, I'll tell you about a retired well driller whose HOA tried to cap the spring that fed half the valley, and the water decree from 1911 that turned their lawsuit into the most expensive mistake that board ever made. Keep your papers. Walk your boundaries. I'll see you then.